Hey guys, welcome to this fondant bow tutorial. Let's get started. I'm going to add some tylose powder into my fondant. So I like to make a little divot in the center and add some tylose powder and fold it around and knead it very well. I'm just adding some cornstarch to my work surface just so the fondant doesn't stick. Sometimes when you add tylose to the fondant, it can stick a little bit. What you want to do now is just start rolling out your fondant to an even thickness so you can roll out some strips. This one is about 1/4 inch thick. This is the fondant strip cutter that I'm going to be using to cut out all of the strips. After you cut your fondant strips, you just want to go back and clean up those edges. I like to use something sharp like a razor blade or a together, and we're going to be using my own brand, Little Hunnys Cakery Edible Glue, available on my website, lhcakery.com. I'm just using a paintbrush here to add the edible glue. Make sure it's adhered nicely. And then I like to cut off the edges so it's like a V shape, and I will show you why when we are assembling this bow. And then what you want to do is just turn it on its side. This will allow it to dry with that shape, like a loop. Some people like to insert something that's round inside, but when you make a ton of them, this is the easiest way. You'll just rest it on its side and they dry really nicely. I'm making a smaller fondant loop here. Now this one is only 4 inches total in length, so that when you fold it over, it's only 2 inches. Now this one's gonna go in the very center of your bow. You don't want it too long. It needs to be short enough that it's not gonna stick up too tall. So keep repeating this process until you have about 18 fondant loops. You can even make some extra in case some break. For the size bow that I'm making, I want to fit perfectly on a 6-inch square cake. So I've cut a 6x6 piece of parchment paper, just making sure that it's the same size as the cake. And then I'm going to start putting my fondant loops together just to make sure I like the shape of it first before I start gluing it all together. I let all my loops dry overnight to ensure that it's fully dried before I assemble the whole thing. Be sure not to skip this step or your bow might collapse. Right now I'm rolling out some of the same color of fondant that I used for the loops. And I'm just going to cut it out with a 2.5 inch circle cutter. To start assembling this fondant bow, you want to place that 2.5 inch circle on top of your parchment paper. And then we're going to glue it using my edible glue. I like to add a little bit of cornstarch just to be sure that it doesn't stick. I'm adding edible glue to the bottom of the fondant loop, and I'm adhering it to the fondant circle along the outer edge. So you can see here, this is why I cut each end of the fondant loop into somewhat of a V shape. This is so that they can sit right next to each other. If I didn't cut off those extra pieces, they would overlap. For the bottom layer of this bow, you're going to want to use 6 loops. I just take the razor blade here and I'm going to cut out this extra little piece of fondant that you see here, and this is only because when you put this bow on top of the cake, I don't want to see that circle that I put underneath. I basically just wanted the circle to adhere to all those fondant loops. So this is just an extra step. You don't have to do it, but I really like how it looks when you clean up those edges. You can also use a pen blade. This one gets into these little crevices here. Now that the base of the bow is done, we're going to work on to this middle part here. So you just want to cut out another 2.5 inch circle out of the same color fondant. Now you want to adhere the other fondant circle to this existing part of the bow. You just want to be generous with the edible glue, and then go ahead and adhere it to the existing part of the bow. This fondant circle makes the fondant loops easy to stick to the existing part of the bow. I like to lay them next to each other just to see how many I'll need for this next layer. And if you have any that haven't been cut into that V shape yet, you can go ahead and cut it even if they're already dried. It won't break your fondant loop. Now that I've positioned all of these fondant loops together, I'm just making sure to glue them to that fondant circle underneath. And the second layer of this bow also took 6 fondant loops. For the next layer of your fondant bow, you just want to roll out some more of the same colored fondant, and we're going to make another circle. Although this time it's going to be only about 1.5 inches instead of 2.5 inches, since the area we have to fit into is much smaller. Apply edible glue to this fondant circle as well so we can adhere it to the existing fondant bow. I'm just doing the same thing as before. I'm just placing the fondant loops side by side just to make sure I like how they're placed and that they all can fit nicely. This last layer of the bow only takes 5 loops. Once you have those fondant loops in the position that fits, you can go ahead and start gluing them to that fondant circle underneath. Once you have all those fondant loops glued together, you want to see if your last and final piece fits right in the center there, and that one does. So what you want to do is take some of the same colored fondant and roll it up into a little ball. And then just add some edible glue right there in the center, add your fondant ball, add some more edible glue, and some glue to the loop, and go ahead and stick it on down. Just don't press too hard or you'll break some of your loops. And here's the finished bow. Be sure to let it sit for at least a few hours if you can't let it sit overnight. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please like and subscribe. Let me know if you have any questions and turn on those post notifications so you know every time I make a new video.